When a game like Division 2 is 4 years old, we inevitably look to push the limits of what can be done in it. For me, that is running a legendary stronghold solo, and I've got just 5 days to create a killer build and complete it, before I need to move on to other builds. How hard can that be? Clearly very, but I've got a plan. I really had 2 options for beating this challenge: find an existing legendary solo build or create my own one from scratch. There are a ton of builds out there, each of which the creators tell me are a cheat code for legendary content. So off I went and ground for the gear they suggested, running countdown after countdown after countdown. Getting the right gear with the right attributes and talents is painful to say the least, but eventually I got there. Now to tackle Legendary District Union Arena, and that is where I ran into some big problems. Skill and all red builds are just too squishy for me. As for tank builds, with their huge shields and excruciatingly slow time to kill, it ended up with me getting shot in my arse more times than Deadpool.
Right up Main Street!
Next I tried some of my go-to builds: Strikers, Heartbreaker, Memento Backpack, Status Effect builds and more, but none of them worked completely. But I did learn 3 essential things that were needed in order to complete a legendary stronghold. For the average player like me, you are going to make mistakes, and when that happens you need to be able to survive. This means running some blue defensive cores, and most importantly, you have to use a Crusader shield. The shield is critical because it gives me time to move out of the firing line, prevents that one shot from a sniper, and lets me burn down enemies without losing any armor. Even when you are in cover, use it. There are times when you need to burn down enemies quickly before you are overwhelmed. When that happens, you need to be able to hit hard from the first hit without waiting for stacks to build up, which means that gear sets like Strikers or Heartbreaker, or even the staple of most solo builds, the Memento Backpack, are not the best to use.
Now!
A huge part of completing a legendary stronghold solo is nothing to do with gear, but rather about knowing where the safe zones and choke points are. There are places in each of the maps where you can shoot from without risk of being overwhelmed. There are even places where enemies will not attack you, even when you are killing them. With all that in mind, I came up with my own legendary build, which included 3 named gear pieces in the Fox's Prayer knee pads, the Contractor's gloves and Bicaro's holster, which between them add a ton of multiplicative damage. This build was nicely balanced between offense and defense, with talents, vigilance and unbreakable to support both. With high critical hit chance and damage, and even more multiplicative damage from flatline, this looked like a great build for legendary content. I now just had to work my way through each area, working out the waves of enemies and how to take them out. With each playthrough I progressed further and further, but then I hit a final problem that might just ruin my chances of beating this challenge. While this build delivers great damage and has great survivability, which got me through to the penultimate area of the stronghold, it is really slow going because of all of its damage is single target, and with every death resetting me back to the start of the stronghold, I could see that I just wasn't going to get there in time. With just 1 day to go, I decided to scrap the build that had got me so far into the stronghold and go with a new one. And I took what I had learned from the build that I had created, that the build needs to be able to deal damage to multiple enemies, and added it to the 3 things I had learned before to come up with a completely new build. And this new build worked, and it worked really well. The build uses 4 pieces of the Negotiator's Dilemma gear set with the talent Hostile Negotiations, which spreads critical damage over up to 3 enemies at a time. I did not use the gear set backpack or chest. Instead, I went with a Seska chest piece, which gets the build as close to the 60% critical hit chance cap as possible. The talent Focus adds 50% weapon damage when aiming for just 10 seconds. Even when I'm not firing. A Grouper Backpack with Vigilance adds a further 25% weapon damage buff, and also pumps up my critical damage even more. Overall, these 2 pieces deliver a much better average damage output than using the gear set pieces. I am running 1 blue defensive core and 5 red defensive cores, which feels the perfect balance for me, with 15% critical hit chance coming from the gear set and 10% from the Seska brand set, I only need to stack another 18% on my gear to get to 58% critical hit chance with my primary weapon. This lets me focus everything else onto critical hit damage to get to a very strong 169%. My backpack does have one armor regen attribute which I can't roll off. It is certainly useful, but I would like to swap it for more critical hit damage if I could. My primary weapon is a Carbine 7, which I like for its slightly higher RPM and stability. Hitting every shot is the best way to increase your damage output after all. With this weapon I'm using the Talent Strain, which synergizes incredibly well with hostile negotiations. My secondary weapon needs no introduction, the Scorpio shotgun. This is the perfect weapon for when rushers get too close, due to the crowd control its talent applies. I have been running this build with the Technician specialization for the small buff it gives to my shield and assault turret, as well as the additional 12% damage to robots. But I'm actually thinking of changing this to Gunner for the armor on kill, the rate of fire and reload buffs, and the bonus armor on using an armor kit. I do think that an assault turret is near essential for legendary strongholds. You need something to distract and suppress enemies while you get on with killing them, and the assault turret is the perfect skill for this. With this build I was able to power through the stronghold quickly, killing multiple enemies at a time. But did I finish it in 5 days? Well, actually, no I didn't. I got to the final boss fight and I'm working out the enemy spawns and how to deal with them, so I'm confident that this will happen in time. But for now, it's time to move on to the next challenge. With Season 11 looking like it will drop shortly, farming for exotics in the DZ will become the new grind to focus on. If you are a solo player, then you need to check out this build here, which will let you move through the DZ undetected, avoiding those pesky rogue agents.